The woman collapsed at the edge of Redemption Falls on a Thursday evening, when the last light of day was bleeding out across the Montana sky like a wound that wouldn't close. She didn't fall dramatically. There was no cry, no gasp, no reaching hand. She simply folded, the way a person folds when they have been holding themselves upright for so long that the body finally refuses to cooperate. One moment she was standing at the edge of the main road, a battered carpetbag clutched to her chest, her dress torn at the hem and caked with the dust of what must have been many miles of walking. The next moment she was on her knees in the dirt, and then on her side, and then still. Two men on horseback passed without slowing. A woman with a market basket crossed to the other side of the street and kept walking. A boy stopped, stared, then ran when his mother called his name. It was Cole Maddox who knelt beside her, not because he was a particularly heroic man, not because he had been watching and waiting for the opportunity. He knelt beside her because he happened to be walking out of the feed store at that exact moment, and because somewhere in the years that had shaped him, someone had taught him that you do not walk past a person lying in the dirt. He pressed two fingers to her wrist, felt a pulse, thin but present. He looked up at the empty street around him. Then he gathered her into his arms, carpetbag and all, and carried her toward the only place he knew she would be safe. Nobody stopped him. Nobody offered to help. That, Cole Maddox had learned long ago, was simply how the world worked. Redemption Falls was a town that had named itself with more optimism than it could sustain. It sat in a shallow valley between two ridges of the Montana Rockies, close enough to the new railroad line to benefit from passing trade, but far enough from any city to have developed the particular insularity of a place that had learned to depend on itself. There was a main street with the usual assortment: mercantile, saloon, post office, church, livery stable, and the sheriff's office with its perpetually crooked sign. There were side streets, with houses ranging from prosperous to struggling. And on the eastern edge of town, past the mill and the tanner, there was a small clinic run by a widowed doctor named Harriet Voss, who had been the closest thing to a saint that Redemption Falls had ever produced. It was to Harriet's clinic that Cole Maddox carried the unconscious woman. Cole himself was not a man who invited much conversation. He was 31 years old, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been weathered by outdoor work into something angular and quiet. He had arrived in Redemption Falls 14 months ago with a horse, a bedroll, and enough money to purchase a modest ranch property 2 miles north of town. He ran cattle. He kept to himself. He was polite when spoken to, and did not speak when he wasn't. The town had accepted him the way frontier towns accept solitary men, with mild curiosity that had gradually settled into the comfortable assumption that some people simply preferred their own company. What the town did not know, because Cole had not told anyone, was why he had come to Redemption Falls specifically. What he had left behind, what he was, in his quieter moments, still trying to outrun. Harriet met him at the clinic door, with the unruffled expression of a woman who had seen everything twice. "Found her on the main road," Cole said. "Collapsed. She's breathing. Bring her in." Harriet held the door. "Put her on the examination table." He laid the woman down carefully, more carefully than the situation perhaps required, and stepped back while Harriet worked. He stood near the wall with his hat in his hands and watched. In the lamplight, he could see her properly for the first time. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and spread across the examination table like scattered ink. Her face was pale beneath the dust of the road, but her features were fine: a straight nose, a determined jaw even in unconsciousness, dark lashes against pale cheeks. Her hands, he noticed, were not the hands of a woman who had lived easily. There were calluses at the base of her fingers, a small scar on her left palm. She had worked hard in her life. Whatever had brought her to the road in this condition, she had not arrived here without a fight. "Dehydration," Harriet announced. "Exhaustion. She's been walking for a long time in the heat." She looked up at Cole. "You know her?" "Never seen her before." Harriet looked back at her patient. "She'll be all right. I'll keep her tonight." A pause. "You can go, Mr. Maddox." Cole looked at the woman on the table for one more moment. "Let me know if she needs anything," he said. Then he put his hat on and walked back out into the evening. He told himself he was simply being neighborly. He almost believed it. Her name was Nora Calloway, and she woke the following morning with no memory of being carried and a great deal of memory of everything that had come before. Harriet gave her water, broth, and the particular kindness of asking no questions until Nora was ready to answer them. It took until mid-morning. "I came from Billings," Nora said finally, sitting up against the pillow with her hands wrapped around a tin cup. I had a situation there that required me to leave quickly." "A situation," Harriet repeated, without judgment. "My employer." Nora's jaw tightened. "I was a housekeeper for a family named Prescott. The father, Mr. Prescott, he decided that my position in his household included certain additional duties that I had not agreed to." She met Harriet's eyes steadily. "I left in the middle of the night. I took what I could carry." Harriet was quiet for a moment. "And you walked from Billings?" "Most of it. I had enough money for the stage to Millhaven. After that," she shrugged, "after that I walked." "That's 60 miles, child." "I'm aware," a small, dry smile. "I had a great deal of time to count them." It was Harriet who mentioned Cole Maddox, mentioned him the way a woman mentions something she wants to seem casual about. "The man who brought you in," she said. "Cole Maddox. He has a ranch north of town. He's been asking after you this morning." Nora looked up. "He has?" "Stopped by an hour ago. Left this." Harriet produced a small bundle wrapped in cloth, fresh bread from the bakery, and a small jar of honey. No note, just the food. Nora looked at the bundle for a long moment. "He doesn't know me," she said. "No," Harriet agreed. "He doesn't." Nora unwrapped the bread slowly. Outside the clinic window, Redemption Falls was going about its morning. Horses passing, voices calling, the distant sound of the blacksmith's hammer. She had not planned to stay. She had not planned anything beyond getting as far from Billings as her legs would carry her. But she was out of money, out of strength, and for the first time in weeks, someone had brought her bread and honey without asking for anything in return. She ate slowly, and thought, and made no decisions yet. Cole told himself he was not watching for her. He was in town 3 days later on legitimate business, supplies from the mercantile, a conversation with the blacksmith about a broken harrow, when he came out of the general store and found Nora Calloway standing at the notice board outside the post office, reading the listings with the focused attention of someone conducting a serious search. She had recovered. Color had returned to her face. She had pinned her dark hair back neatly and wore a clean dress that was slightly too large for her, borrowed, he guessed, from Harriet. She was reading the employment listings. He watched her trace her finger down the board, slow down at certain entries, move on from others. He watched the small frown that crossed her face when she reached the bottom, and apparently found nothing satisfactory. "Anything useful?" he asked. She startled, then collected herself quickly, turning to face him with the particular composure of a woman who had learned not to show surprise. "Mr. Maddox," she said, "I owe you a debt." "You don't," he said. "You carried me off the street. Anyone would have." "They didn't," she said simply. He had no answer for that, because it was true. He looked at the notice board instead. "What are you looking for?" "Work. No hesitation. No embarrassment. I'm a housekeeper. I cook, clean, manage accounts, handle correspondence. I have good references from 3 previous employers." A slight pause. 4, if we don't count the most recent one. Cole looked at her profile. She was staring at the notice board with the determined expression of a woman who had been knocked down enough times to have developed a system for getting back up. "I have a ranch," he said, before he had entirely decided to say it. She turned to look at him. "It's not much," he said. 2 ranch hands, no cook, books that haven't been properly kept in 8 months. The house is," he considered the honest word, "functional." "How much?" she asked. He named a fair wage. She looked at him steadily for a moment, as if measuring the offer against some internal scale. "I would need my own room," she said, "with a lock." "There's a room off the kitchen," he said. "I'll put a lock on it today." Another moment of assessment. "I'll need Sundays." "Agreed. And I won't be spoken to with disrespect, by you or anyone on your property. Miss Calloway." His voice was quiet but absolute. "That will not be an issue." She looked at him for one more long moment. "All right, Mr. Maddox," she said. "I'll take the position." She had not exaggerated her capabilities. Within a week, the ranch house had been transformed from the functional disorder of a man living alone into something that felt, with startling speed, like a home. The accounts were current, the pantry was organized. Meals appeared at regular hours, simple food, but well-made, the kind of cooking that suggested someone who understood that a working man needed fuel, not performance. Cole's ranch hands, brothers named Walt and Pete Gruber, had greeted Nora's arrival with the suspicious wariness of men whose comfortable disorder was being threatened. By the end of the first week, Walt was bringing in firewood without being asked, and Pete had quietly fixed the broken hinge on the kitchen door that had been rattling for 6 months. Cole noticed all of this from a careful distance. He was not a man who crowded people. He had learned, through a particular experience he did not discuss, that people needed space to show you who they were. He gave Nora that space. He was courteous at meals, answered questions about the ranch when asked, and otherwise left her to establish herself in whatever way she needed. What he noticed, despite his care not to look too closely, was that she was watchful. Not frightened exactly, but alert in the particular way of someone who had learned that safety was conditional. She always sat where she could see the door. She was always the last to leave a room. She noted things, small things, exits and entrances, who was where, at what time. He recognized it because he had done the same thing for 2 years after leaving Kansas. He did not ask her about it. He put a solid lock on her door. He made sure Walt and Pete understood, without being specific about why, that Miss Calloway was to be treated with complete respect. He left a lamp burning in the kitchen window on the nights he worked late, so she would see the light when she came downstairs. Small things, things that cost him nothing. He told himself that was all they were. The complication arrived on a Tuesday, in the form of a man named Gerald Fitch. Cole was mending fence on the north pasture when he saw the rider coming up the track from town, well-dressed for the frontier, on a good horse, with the air of a man accustomed to being received rather than arriving. He stopped his horse at the fence line and looked down at Cole with an expression that contained a specific kind of familiarity. "You Cole Maddox?" "I am." "Gerald Fitch." He didn't dismount. "I'm looking for a woman named Nora Calloway. I have reason to believe she's working on your property." Cole set down his fence tool slowly, looked up at Fitch. "What's your interest?" "She's my fiancée." The word landed with a practiced ease. "We had a misunderstanding. I've come to bring her home." Cole looked at him for a long moment. Fitch had the smooth face of a man who spent little time outdoors and the eyes of a man who was accustomed to being believed. "I'll let her know you're here," Cole said. "She can decide if she wants to speak with you." Something shifted in Fitch's expression. Just briefly, just a flicker of something that wasn't quite what a worried fiancé should look like. "That's a strange way to run a household," Fitch said. "It's my household," Cole said. "I'll be back directly." He found Nora in the kitchen. When he said the name Gerald Fitch, the color left her face so completely and so quickly that he stepped forward instinctively, as if she might fall again. She didn't fall. She gripped the edge of the table and breathed. "He's here," she said. It wasn't a question. "At the north fence. I didn't bring him to the house." Cole kept his voice level. "You don't have to see him." She looked up at him. Her eyes were steady, frightened underneath. He could see that, but steady on the surface, in the way that had become familiar to him. "He'll tell you we're engaged," she said. He did. "We're not." Her voice was flat. "We were. Once. Briefly. I ended it when I found out what he was." She paused. "Gerald Fitch is the man who owns the Prescott house in Billings." Cole was still for a moment. "He's the employer you left. He owns the family. The business. Mr. Prescott answers to him." She released the table edge. "He decided that my refusing him was a problem, to be corrected, rather than a decision to be respected. He has been looking for me for 6 weeks." Cole looked at her for one long moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the north pasture. Fitch was still waiting at the fence line when Cole returned. He had the patient stillness of a man who was certain he would get what he came for. "She doesn't wish to see you," Cole said. Fitch's expression didn't change. "That's not her decision to make." "It's entirely her decision." Cole's voice was quiet. "She's employed here. She's safe here. And she's indicated she has no desire to speak with you. She's my fiancée." She says otherwise. A pause. Fitch looked at him with the measuring look of a man recalculating. Mr. Maddox, I'm a businessman with considerable interests in this territory. I have friends in the territorial government, friends in the railroad office, friends who have influence over the kind of grazing rights and water access that a cattle operation like yours depends on. He said it pleasantly, conversationally. I'd hate for there to be any difficulty between neighbors. Cole picked up his fence tool. Mr. Fitch, he said, I've been threatened by men with more power than you and less manners. The answer was the same then as it is now. He met his eyes directly. Get off my land. Something cold moved through Fitch's expression, the pleasant mask dropping just far enough to show what was underneath it. Then he turned his horse and rode back toward town without another word. Cole watched him go. Then he went back to mending the fence, and he worked until his hands ached, because physical work was the only thing he had ever found that quieted the particular kind of anger that had just moved through him. That evening, after supper, Nora found him on the porch. She sat in the other chair, the one that had been empty since he'd bought the property, and for a while neither of them spoke. The Montana night came down around them, cold and full of stars, and somewhere out in the dark a coyote called once and fell silent. He won't stop, she said finally. I know. He has influence here. What he said about grazing rights, it wasn't an idle threat. He's the kind of man who follows through on that kind of thing. I know that too. She turned to look at him. And? Cole looked out at the dark pasture for a moment. I came to Redemption Falls, he said slowly, because I needed a place where I could build something that was mine, something clean. He paused. I had a partner in Kansas, good friend, or I thought he was. He was taking money from our operation and blaming it on our workers. Good men, I found out. I told the truth about it, and it cost me everything I had built there. He turned to look at her. I know what it is to have someone with power decide that your truth is inconvenient. Nora was quiet, watching his face. I'm not going to let Gerald Fitch take anything else from you, he said. That's not a negotiation. It's just a fact. She looked at him for a long time in the darkness. Cole Maddox, she said quietly. Why did you bring me bread and honey when you didn't even know my name? He was quiet for a moment. Because you'd been walking 60 miles, he said, and you'd done it alone, and it seemed like the least the world could do was offer you something sweet when you finally stopped. The silence that followed was the kind that changes things. Nora looked back out at the stars. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, something carefully held finally setting down its weight. I haven't told anyone the whole of it, she said, about Fitch, about what I found out before I left. You don't have to tell me. I know. She paused. I want to. And she told him. Gerald Fitch had not merely been her employer and her unwanted suitor. In going through his correspondence, looking, she admitted, for evidence that would protect her if she needed it, she had found letters that revealed something far more serious than a powerful man's wounded pride. Fitch had been systematically defrauding the families of ranch workers throughout the territory, forging land documents, manipulating water rights, forcing small operations into debt, and then acquiring their properties at a fraction of their value. Nora had names, she had dates. She had copied 3 of the letters before she fled. They were in the lining of her carpetbag. Cole sat with that information for a long moment. You've been carrying that for 6 weeks, he said. I didn't know who to trust with it. He looked at her. Do you trust me with it now? She met his eyes in the darkness, steady, serious, searching. Yes, she said. I think I do. The letters went to the territorial marshal's office in Helena 3 days later, carried by Cole himself, with a signed statement from Nora and a detailed account of Fitch's visit to the ranch and his explicit threats. The marshal, a thorough man named Adkins who had been quietly building a case against Fitch's land operations for over a year, received the documents with an expression of profound satisfaction. Gerald Fitch was arrested in Redemption Falls on a Friday morning in front of the post office while he was in the process of composing what was later found to be a letter to his contacts in the territorial government asking them to apply pressure to a cattle operation north of town. The timing, Cole thought, had a certain justice to it. Nora was in the kitchen when he came back from town that afternoon. She was making bread. She had discovered that bread making was the thing she did when she was anxious. which meant the ranch had been extraordinarily well supplied with bread for the past week. She looked up when he came through the door. He told her in a few words, watched the news move across her face. First disbelief, then a careful, fragile relief, then something that was almost wonder. "It's done?" she asked. "It's done." She sat down at the kitchen table, set her hands flat on the surface, breathed. Cole put on the coffee, because it seemed like the right thing to do, and because he needed something to do with his hands. They sat across from each other with their cups, and for a long time the only sounds were the fire in the stove and the distant noise of the cattle, and the particular quiet of two people who have been through something together and are only now beginning to understand what that means. "I suppose," Nora said finally, "that I no longer have a reason to stay." Cole looked at his coffee cup. "No," he said, "I suppose you don't." A pause. "Unless you wanted one." She looked up at him. He met her eyes, direct, quiet, without performance or pretense. "The accounts still need keeping," he said. "Walt and Pete still can't cook. And—" he stopped, looked at his cup again. "And I've gotten accustomed to there being a light in the kitchen window." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Cole Maddox," she said, "are you asking me to stay?" "I'm asking you," he said carefully, "if you want to." The distinction, she recognized it immediately, mattered enormously. He was not asking her to stay for his sake. He was asking whether, for her own sake, this was a place she wanted to be. She looked around the kitchen that she had made orderly and warm. She looked at the window with its view of the Montana mountains going gold in the late afternoon. She looked at the man across the table, steady and quiet and honest, the kind of man who puts a lock on a door without being asked, and brings bread to a stranger, and stands at a fence line and says, "Get off my land," without raising his voice. "Yes," she said, "I want to." They were married the following spring, in the church in Redemption Falls, on a morning when the mountains were still capped with snow but the valley was green and the air smelled of pine and new earth. Harriet Voss sat in the front row and looked satisfied in the way of a woman who had known how something would end before the people involved had any idea. Walt and Pete Gruber wore their good shirts. Nora wore her dark hair down, the way it had fallen across the examination table on the night she arrived, and Cole, standing at the front of the church, watched her walk toward him with the expression of a man who understands, for the first time in a long while, exactly where he is supposed to be. She had come to Redemption Falls with 60 miles of road behind her and everything she owned in a battered carpetbag. She had been turned away from doors, overlooked on streets, left in the dust of people who had decided she didn't matter. And in the end, it was a quiet man with a fence tool and a lamp in the window who had simply, without drama, without demand, refused to walk past. Some people collapse at the edge of a road when they have nothing left, and some people kneel down beside them. Nora Calloway had learned, in the end, that those were the people worth staying for.